Real, where we introduce corporate leaders who have taken the leap to business owner and participate with their great idea in our guest blog, found on shareyourstories.online. Our guest joins us from Paris, Ontario. Tammy Adams has over 30 years' experience in education and human resources, who has combined this experience to become an advanced grief recovery specialist in support of personal transformation. Let's find out how her network of colleagues supported a change in her business model with a new focus on service, helping others reclaim their happiness, inner peace, and emotional freedom. It is my pleasure to introduce and welcome Tammy Adams.
Oh, thanks for having me, Trish.
You know what? I'm so thrilled to meet you because I have to say, your area of expertise touches every single individual. We all experience loss at some point in time in our lives, some of us earlier than others, but we never have the tools in order to try to deal with these situations. So give us a little bit of background into how you became a grief recovery specialist, because clearly when you started, your target market was a little different.
Absolutely. I opened my business. I left the corporate world because I was frustrated by policy and procedure. You know, I would get somebody almost to that breaking point, and then policy, procedure, whatever would dictate that was where we stopped. And so I decided to take my expertise and open my own business. And initially, I kind of made that jump, like many of us do, as a life coach. And so half of my business was energy work like Reiki and access bars meditation. The other side of my business was life coaching. And I was actually working with a client who was really stuck. And it was a colleague who suggested that I call the Grief Recovery Institute. Well, I said to them, like, no, you have no idea. This is not my wheelhouse. I don't go to funerals. I don't go to cemeteries. I'm always that person that shows up after everybody else has left. I said, I'm really not comfortable in the sector. And she said, I really think that you need to look into this. So I called the Institute. I was on the phone with them for about an hour. And they said, you're already doing it. You just don't know you are. And so I did the training, and it was through the training that I realized how much unresolved emotions I myself was carrying. And I just hit the pause button and I did the whole program myself. I cleared all the unresolved issues. I mended my broken heart. And when I actually stepped into kind of this arena, like the slate was clean for me. I was 100% focused on my clients and their needs because I'd already taken care of my own stuff.
You know, that's a really remarkable story, because if it wasn't for your network, the folks in your network sort of making some suggestions, you may not have stumbled upon this whole new area of expertise.
And I think it's really important to point out to the listeners, this was an area that I wasn't comfortable in. And so I dug my feet in, I put the brakes on, I said, I'm not interested, I don't want to talk about this. And yet, honestly, Trish, I love what I do, because it does not matter the loss. It does not matter where you are when you make that call to me. I hold space for you because I know where you'll be when we're done. And the whole process is about you getting your life back, finding those pieces of yourself. This filled a void for me. I've been in professional development for the last 40 years. And yes, all of the other mentors, the courses, the books, all of that played a role in getting me to where I am. But grief recovery was not only the missing piece personally, but it was also the missing piece professionally. And in the last 6 months, I've basically cleared my schedule. I've given up all the energy work. I've given up the life coaching. I'm referring people to my colleagues for that sort of thing. And I'm really focused on grief recovery, because it is such an essential step in all of us showing up in the world differently.
You know, what's so true is you used a phrase that you had felt stuck. And I think that each and every one of us at different stages of life feels stuck. But I don't think that we correlate feeling stuck with grief recovery. Because I
No,
don't think, unless you've had a recent episode in your life or someone has passed in your life recently, or I'm sure it even works, if you've lost a job suddenly, or, if something in your life has shown up and it's a sudden change, that can lead to grief. So
absolutely.
is there something that you can share with our viewing and listening audience that you have found that's similar with your clients when you say, how do we define stuck? How do I know that being stuck isn't just stuck because I'm frustrated with my job? How do I know that stuck is feeling that I need to reach out to someone with your area of expertise as it relates to grief?
Well, let's take it one step further and replace the word stuck with grief. So I have had so many people call me and say, Tammy, I would take your course, but I've never had anyone die. So grief does not apply to me. And so that's where the conversation starts in regards to what is the definition of grief. So I want your listeners to pass their life through these 5 statements. Grief is the normal and natural reaction to an emotional loss of any kind. So that's usually when our mind goes to death, divorce, loss of a job, that sort of thing. It's obvious. Then grief is also the conflicting emotions that come up when we have a change in something that was familiar. Think of how many lottery winners sabotage their win because they never resolved going from paycheck to paycheck to having this life of abundance. It is also about the things that we wished had been better, different, or more. It's about our unrealized hopes, dreams, and expectations. And the biggest part, those things that were left unsaid. And the more I do this work, I've discovered 2 things. One is it works as well on good relationships as it does on toxic relationships. And the other thing that I've learned is what drives so much of this feeling stuck, so much of this unresolved grief is our expectations of ourselves, our expectations of others. And without the tools to resolve those disappointments, we just keep looping and looping and looping. And that is the definition of being stuck.
You know
So,
what? That is actually how many people cannot relate to that. I mean, those 5 statements then really opens the door to a whole new way of looking at defining why we feel the way that we feel. Because society doesn't give us tools.
no, and it's interesting because people will call me usually because of the death of a loved one or some huge, enormous loss. And yes, we do need to process that. I'm not like belittling that huge loss, but what they discover through the process is that big, enormous loss was the trigger for them to pick up the phone and call me. But as we go through the discovery process, most people find that their unresolved emotions go back to when they were 4 years old, 8 year old, 10 years old. And this grief has accumulated, it's built one on top of the other, on top of the other. And without the tools to recognize it, without the tools to process it, we just accept being stuck. We accept this 20% of happiness as if it were 100% because either everything else we've tried hasn't worked or we just can't possibly see our way out of it.
Now, your background is in education.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that I know is a very broad category, but clearly the work that you're doing is really helping to educate people how to recognize triggers in their own life and then how not only to identify them, but to act on them.
Absolutely. And you hit on a really important point because the grief recovery method is not described as counseling or therapy. It's 100% defined as an educational program. So you nailed it. And that's what we do. We spend those first 2 weeks unlearning everything we thought we knew about grief, learning the correct information so that you've got this foundation on which to move forward as you process these emotions. It is the most amazing process, and it's nothing like you expect it to be.
So you used a statistic and you said 20% happiness. Is that sort of the average that us as humans recognize in terms of saying, well, okay, I'm happy most of the time, so that's okay?
I think so. And I think the more cumulative grief that you have stored within you, the number may not start at 20, it might start at 90 and then it goes down to 80 and then it goes down to 70. It's important to know that the grief recovery method is the only grief program that has the science behind it to back it. Because what we want to do is we want to process these emotions intellectually. Our mind wants to find the reason, it wants to understand, it wants to process this from a judgment perspective. It wants somebody to be right or wrong. And yet, to resolve these unresolved emotions, you have to go down to your heart. And your heart processes things on such a different level. It basically, here's what you did. Here's how it made you feel, or made me feel, sorry. And then this is how we resolve it. And that step of resolving is different with every relationship that shows up. But your heart just wants to be heard. It wants the pain to be validated and recognized, witnessed, and then it just releases it. So, with using all of the other methods, we stay stuck up here, and that's not how you process it. You have to step down here into your heart.
So is there a communication tool? So, for those in our viewing and listening audience who are connecting with what you're saying, they're saying, I get it. That sounds like me. Maybe I need to do some work, but they're really hesitant to because there's a huge trust factor here. They're going to be opening the door to a lot of relationship issues or events in life that maybe have created some sort of trauma or conflict. So there has to be a really wonderful connection between you and the client. But is there a communication tool that you can share with our viewing and listening audience to say, look, if you recognize the trigger, this is something that you can do to try to alleviate that level of stress that you feel when you're triggered?
I think there is a starting place, and that's a really good question, Trish. One of the things is first, you've got to just be still and see, can you feel this discomfort, this uncomfortableness within your body? And where does it show up? Like, where are you feeling it in your body? Like, some people feel a heaviness in their chest. Their shoulders are up around their or their ears, not their eyes. They've got this anxiety in their stomach. And then the next thing I suggest to someone is to start journaling. Give those emotions a name and allow them to show up on paper. So that's kind of the next step. The next thing I suggest is find a friend who is willing to listen to you, not judge you, not try to fix it, not trying to analyze it, just to give you that safe place to express it. And then once you've gone through these kind of initial steps, then what I suggest to people is they reach out to a professional to help them really unpack this. Because what I have discovered is grief is so personal and it's so deep and it's so complex. The process to heal is actually very simple, but grief itself, it's very difficult to step into that observer's role, to be able to step back and get that aerial view. And it was interesting. Yesterday, I was working with a client and they did an amazing job unpacking things. But as they're talking, I'm kind of listening and I'm hearing those things that are there but have not been recognized. And so, I throw it out there. If it resonates, fine. If not, fine. And the feedback I got was, you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. And those are the pieces you miss when you're doing it on your own, because it's just too difficult to have that level of perspective.
That's a really good point, because I think that, sometimes we think we've got it all figured out, like we have to do this. This is a personal situation that's not to be shared. So we have to internalize it and figure it out, like the saying that comes to mind that I think I've heard more often in my life is, like, suck it up, buttercup, like, just figure it out. Right. And so you internalize those things to a point where you say, okay, this is what I did before. and that seemed to work. So I'll just do that again. And it may be a totally different situation. And so the level of anxiety that you may feel is totally different, and it doesn't work. So you just push it down further, right? Until you become numb to those particular triggers. So I think what's really amazing about the work that you do is that you're giving people an option.
Yeah.
You're saying nobody says that there's any right or wrong here. It's okay to do whatever you feel that you need to do, but you're actually that voice in the background that could recognize some things when we're sharing events or dialogues that maybe we don't hear.
It's funny, Trish, when I first did this, I would watch TV with my husband and I go, that's unresolved grief. That's unresolved grief. Because every TV show, every movie, every book, every play is driven by unresolved emotions.
Right.
And so one day he said to me, not everything's grief. And I thought, okay, maybe I've been a little overzealous here with this new tool that I found. And then about a year and a half later, he went through the program and he took care of his past. And now we'll be watching TV, a movie, whatever. And he's the first one now to say,
Oh,
that's unresolved emotion.
It's wonderful that it's there.
It
you
is.
just have to recognize it in a different way, right?
You do. And I can say from personal experience, having gone through 40 years of personal development, I had convinced myself I was fine. I was absolutely fine. I had done the work, I had taken care of things. But having found grief recovery and actually really doing that deep inner emotional work,
right.
I spent the first 50 years of my life in fight and flight. Like that was my defense strategy,
right.
Trying to control everything so that I would feel safe, which of course was an illusion. But since I've taken care of the past and all the pain that went with it, I have found this inner peace that I will defend at all costs because I never thought I'd be here. I really didn't.
Isn't that wonderful? That's a really wonderful way to sort of wrap up our conversation, because the viewing and listening audience is now hearing a testimonial as an individual who's gone through the program and is now ready to help other individuals find that same transformative, peaceful place. So I think that's a really wonderful way to sort of wrap up what we're talking about today, because one of the things that we also do in the guest blog is we ask folks for 3 words of advice. So your words are value, commitment, and perseverance. So give us an indication as to why those 3 words are important to you.
Well, I think the perseverance one is the one that really stands out because, we go through life and we're reactive all of the time. And if you really are looking for that value, what you need is to be persistent, consistent, and you need to be open to finding out those new things about you, those new tools, those way to, navigate the things that are coming towards us. And I can speak as an entrepreneur that, I remember when I started this, people would say, the first 5 years are really tough. The first 5 years are really tough. And you think they're just kind of giving you, words of advice, whatever. The first 5 years are very tough. You're riding on a roller coaster. You're trying to figure it out. You've lost that paycheck, somebody else looking after your financial future, all of that stuff. And I think without the persistence, I think there are so many entrepreneurs that give up way too soon because I found grief recovery probably around the 3-year mark. So for those first 2 years, I was dipping my toe in this and dipping my toe in that. And I think I shared in the conversation that we had earlier, I belonged to this networking group that created this safe place for me to kind of practice this stuff and try to figure things out. But when I found grief recovery and I went to the meeting that night to share this new service that I found, the room just erupted in applause and smiles on everyone's face. And I was really shocked, and I said, what brought about that response? They said, you found it. This is your purpose, and this is why you're here. And, you know, without that support group, without that safe place, without the persistence in searching for that value, I probably would have gave up. And, you know, I'm 9 years in now, and like I say, I love what I do. And I can't imagine doing anything else. And I could do this till I'm 100. It wouldn't bother me at all.
Well, I have to say that the energy and the passion that you share for what you do comes through in your voice. And I know that it will give people that vote of confidence that there is another alternative if they'd like to explore it. And, you know, you've given us some great practical tips in the meantime while we're trying to figure it out. So thank you so much for spending some time with me today and giving us a little bit of the background into the story behind the story for not only you as an individual, but the business that you're pursuing. So thank you so much, Tammy.
Oh, and thank you so much, Trish. My goal is just to have conversations about this and normalize the fact that, you know, treat it normal, natural. And it's opportunities like you've just given me today that allow that conversation to take place. So thank you.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. And to you, our viewing and listening audience, I'd like to thank you for joining us today for this edition of Keeping It Real, introducing you to the person behind the logo. If you'd like to connect with our guest, you'll find Tammy's contact information in the description portion below. I'm Trish Tonai, author, artist, and the founder and host for the series. And if you're interested in sharing your business story, visit our website at shareyourstories.online and subscribe to our channel, Business Mentorship, Keeping It Real. Thanks again for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting you next time when we share another great idea.